Self-regulated learning has been my obsession, and huge part of my life for many years now. And I did a PhD in it, and lots of the key ideas, the key concepts, which I'll share with you in a few moments, are based in the work that I did for my doctoral study. And so, what is self-regulated learning, and why should we be focusing on this in schools? For a long time, when I do training around this, I often ask teachers this question: what's the one thing that you would change if you had a magic wand and you could change something about your pupils? What's the one thing that you would change? And there are many answers to that question. And lots of people say, I want them to be a passionate reader. I want them to be really knowledgeable. There's all kinds of different things. But the most common answer by far is that people say, I want them to be more independent. I want them to be more resilient. I want them to be more proactive, to be more confident, to have more self-belief. There's sort of like variations on a theme. And sometimes you hear that same idea expressed in slightly more negative language. People say things like, I want them to be less needy. I feel like I have to spoon feed them. It feels like there's a bit of their brain that's sort of switched off, and that the teacher has to do all the work, and that their pupils aren't sort of meeting them halfway. And so there's a very strong appetite for this stuff among teachers, the people who know their pupils the best. They know that there's something that's not quite happening there. And I think that that's because, in schools, we set the agenda. Adults set the agenda for what needs to be learned and when and how, because time is precious, and we want to use our time as efficiently as possible. And we set deadlines, and we swoop in and intervene. We use the language of intervention all the time if it looks like children aren't going to meet some deadline. And the question sort of almost asks itself: how can young people learn how to regulate their own learning when everything is being so externally regulated by the adult, by the teacher? So that's one answer to that question of why. But also, when you speak with children and young people, they often say that they want to have more say in what happens in their school. And Nahida, our amazing host today, is the head teacher of a school where the children and young people absolutely exemplify that. They really have developed a very strong sense of identity and voice, but that isn't necessarily that widespread across the system. And so children and young people want to have more say over what they do, and self-regulated learning helps them to do that. It's also necessary for life in a rapidly changing world, the ability to learn stuff, to learn on our feet, to adapt to new situations. The world of work is changing apace. And so that's a strong reason for, how can we prepare people for an uncertain future? We help them to learn how to learn more effectively, how to be more independent. And there's also really strong evidence that doing this stuff, when you do it well, and it's not that easy to do well, hence this resource, when you do it well, there's lots of evidence that it improves educational outcomes, it improves exam results, it also improves life outcomes, senses of well-being, and so on. So there are many, many reasons as to why we should be doing this. And so that's the why. And now let's move on to the what. So the starting point for me is metacognition. So I'm going to share with you now the conceptual framework of the key ideas that really go into this resource. So metacognition is essentially monitoring and controlling your thought processes. And those two words, monitoring and control, we'll see are really important. That's really the centerpiece of this whole thing. So metacognition is noticing what's happening in your head and responding to that. So it's like noticing, is your mind racing? Are you really distracted today? Is there lots of negative self-talk? Are you beating yourself up about stuff? Are you worrying about things in the future? What's going on in your head, and how should you respond to that? Then we have self-regulation, which again is about monitoring and controlling, but this is more to do with the external environment, how we interact with the external environment through our feelings and our behaviors, the information coming into us and going out of us through what we say and do. And you can see that these are two sort of mirror images of one another. Metacognition is monitoring and controlling what's going on in your head. Self-regulation, monitoring and controlling your feelings and behaviors. And these are two huge categories. Your thought processes, you could think about a million things. Likewise, your feelings and behaviors, it's a massive category, and it doesn't all relate to learning. And so we then have this third concept, self-regulated learning, which is about pulling down, drawing down these two powerful processes of metacognition and self-regulation and applying them to learning itself. So that's the third piece, if you like. And as I say, monitoring and controlling are right at the heart of this whole thing. And one leads to the other. The noticing, the monitoring, the tuning in, drawing your attention to certain things, that's what leads to the controlling to be allowed to happen. Because through noticing things, you notice that you are not your thoughts, that you have some distance. It gives you some space to play with, to realize that you have options here. And there are all kinds of arrows flowing in all kinds of different directions here. So monitoring and controlling feed into both metacognition and self-regulation. And all of that stuff feeds into this overarching idea of self-regulated learning. This is what we want people to do, to monitor and control their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in service of their learning goals. And the final thing to say about the conceptual framework here is that there are a number of other key ideas we won't go into now because there's not really time, but there are a number of other ideas that sort of sit around this system that enable all of this to take place. And so there's knowledge, and that could be knowledge of subjects, but also knowledge of all this stuff, knowledge of self-regulated learning, and also knowledge of self. Who are you? What do you want to achieve? How do you fit into the world? Self-efficacy, to what extent do you believe that you could become a self-regulated learner? Motivation, of course, you need to be motivated to take part in these activities in order to do them. Oracy is absolutely huge. Spoken language is very largely how these ideas are enacted in classrooms and beyond. And lastly, agency. The word self-regulation almost implies like a thermostat type idea, doesn't it? Where there are options, and so there needs to be some sort of degree of freedom among children and young people and adults to be able to make decisions about what they do, when, and how. So that's a quick overview of the key concepts that underpin this resource.